at exactly 0407 hours. On May 9th, 2026, Victory Day morning, the dawn over the Saratov Oblast was sliced open by a single radar return that should not have existed. On board the Russian A-50U Mainstay early warning aircraft, Bort 47, orbiting at 30,000 feet over the Volga in a holding pattern protecting the Engels 2 strategic bomber base, the senior radar operator stared at his Vega M console and felt the blood drain from his face. 84 low-altitude contacts, RCS 0.02 square meters, speeds between 180 and 240 kilometers per hour, altitude 60 meters above ground level, were fanning out across the airspace in 3 coordinated wedges, vectoring directly toward the airfield where 27 of Russia's most valuable strategic bombers were parked in the open. 295 milliseconds, 2160, 222 M3, the hammers of the Russian nuclear triad. And in less than 9 minutes, those drones would be on top of them. The operator screamed into his command net, "Vector control, Bort 47, mass air target, multi-axis, type Liutyi and FP-2, range now 140 kilometers from Engels, time to impact 8 minutes 30 seconds. Ukraine is attacking, repeat, Ukraine is attacking, and the ceasefire is broken." But this was not just any morning. This was the morning the entire Russian state had built around for 36 hours. On Red Square, 750 kilometers to the northwest, Vladimir Putin was minutes from stepping onto the reviewing stand. The first column of T-90M Proryev tanks had already rolled into position. Foreign dignitaries, Belarus's Lukashenko, a senior envoy from Beijing, an Indian delegation, the presidents of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan were seated in the heated viewing pavilions, their breath visible in the cold spring air. Channel 1 Russia, RIA Novosti, RT, CCTV, 1-3 and a pool feed redistributed by every wire service on Earth had cameras live. 800 million viewers were tuning in, including the entire defense attaché corps of NATO. Putin's unilateral 4 8-hour ceasefire, declared on May 5 with a thinly veiled threat that any disruption of the celebrations will be met with overwhelming response, was in its final 30 hours. And someone in Kyiv had just decided that the most photographed moment in Russia's calendar would be the moment her ribcage cracked open on global television. In the Combat Information Center, buried 18 meters beneath the Engels, 2 airfield, Major Konstantin Volkov had 510 seconds. 510 seconds to scramble fighters, light up Pantsir S-2 short-range air defense systems, vector up the resident MiG, 3-1 BM interceptor flight, and somehow explained to the Aerospace Forces General Staff how 84 unmanned aircraft had penetrated 1,200 kilometers into the Russian Federation undetected. The truth, which Volkov could not yet know, was that they had not been undetected at all. They had been seen, tracked, and deliberately ignored by a Russian air defense radar network whose database had been quietly poisoned by a Ukrainian main intelligence directorate cyber operation 11 days earlier, an operation codenamed Pomsta, vengeance that planted modified target classification firmware inside the Nebo-M radar systems guarding the Saratov sector. Every Liutyi drone in the swarm was being painted by Russian radar and being classified as a flock of greater white-fronted geese on their northern migration. The lie was perfect. The lie had a 1-3-day expiration date. The lie was holding for 9 more minutes. The Liutyi UJ-25, Ukraine's long-range AI-assisted strike drone, 7.2-meter wingspan, 7.5 kilogram warhead, 1,400 kilometer range, satellite cued and terrain following, was not designed for elegance. It was designed for what Ukrainian doctrine now called bavovna cotton, the slang for the silent white explosion of a fuel-air payload going off in the dark. Tonight, those Liutyas were flying in mixed formation with the smaller, faster FP-2 quadcopter jet hybrid, an AI-piloted swarm node that could autonomously retarget, formation shift, and bait air defenses by sacrificing wingmen. On board each drone, an NVIDIA Jetson Edge compute module ran a vision model trained on 11 terabytes of Russian airbase imagery, scored against a target priority ladder Kyiv had personally signed off on. 2 160 strategic bombers first, 2 95 milliseconds second, KH-101 cruise missile storage bunkers third, fuel tanks fourth, control tower last. The swarm did not need a human to decide. The swarm had been told what to want. At 0408, Major Volkov's order finally hit the Pantsir. S-2 batteries ringing engels. 12 launchers, 96 missiles between them, the most modern point defense system Russia fielded. The radars went hot. The acquisition tracks slewed. The launchers elevated. And then, simultaneously, every single Pantsir went into a forced reboot cycle. On the operator's screens, the firmware logs scrolled with errors no Russian engineer had seen before. Invalid IFF challenge timeouts, target classification database corruption, ammunition computer authentication failures. The Ukrainian cyber payload that had ridden into the system on a counterfeit Belarusian firmware update 3 weeks ago was now executing its second stage. 12 Pantsirs went dark in 14 seconds. The ring of steel around the bombers became a ring of bricks. 400 meters from the runway, prone in the spring grass, Captain Andriy Tarasenko of Ukraine's Timkasivka Special Operations Group, 6 men in full ghillie suits, who had been infiltrated 3 weeks earlier through a route the SBU had refused to brief even Volodymyr Zelensky on, watched his ruggedized tablet light up with the green confirmation tone. The Pantsers were down. The drones were inbound. His timeline was now. He keyed his encrypted satellite radio. Pomsta 6 to Sokil. Phase 2 go. We are hot in 3. He flicked the safety off his suppressed Browning 9mm and looked at the nearest sentry tower. The man inside was smoking, his back to the airfield, watching a live stream of the Red Square Parade on his phone. 60 seconds later, every overhead light at Engels, 2 went dark. The substation feeding the base, a small, lightly guarded transformer farm 3 kilometers down the M32 highway, had just absorbed a single anti-tank rocket-propelled grenade from a stationary blue Lada Niva that had been parked in a roadside lay-by since 0245. The 2 men inside the Niva had been part of a deep-cover Ukrainian network operating in Saratov Oblast since November 2024. Their identities, real names, and family histories will not be declassified in our lifetimes. They were dead by 0410. Their car, a burning shell on the highway shoulder, victims of a Russian National Guard patrol that arrived too late to save the substation, but in time to ensure no one would ever question them about it. They had bought Ukraine 60 seconds of total electrical blackout across the airfield. 60 seconds was all the swarm needed. Inside the unlit, hardened command bunker, Major Volkov's emergency diesel generators kicked over with the dull thump of compression ignition. Screens flickered back. The first Liutyi was now 22 kilometers out. The MiG-31BMs that should have been airborne 240 seconds ago were still on the apron, their pilots running across the tarmac in flight gear, their ground crews fumbling in the dark. There was exactly one weapon system on the entire base that was unaffected by the cyber kill, the blackout, and the chaos. A single S-400 Triumph battery emplaced 18 kilometers to the northeast for high-altitude theater defense, never intended for low-altitude swarm interdiction, with a minimum engagement altitude of 100 meters and a kill rate profile optimized for cruise missiles, not 200 kph drones. Volkov ordered it to fire anyway. The S-400's 9M96E, 2 missiles streaked down toward the swarm. They killed 9 Liutyi's in the first salvo, then 12 more on the second. Then the fire control radar acquired a phantom target, an FP-2 designated by the Ukrainian swarm AI as Decoy Alpha Kilo, carrying a programmable RF reflector that simulated the radar return of a Tu-95 bomber climbing for takeoff, and the S-400's algorithms fed contradictory priority data, locked onto the FP-2 with 2 missiles each costing $2.1 million. The FP-2 cost $14,000. It died. The swarm continued. What would you do if you were Putin in this moment? The parade about to begin. Your strategic bombers about to be vaporized live on television. Your air defenses revealed as digital ghosts. And the West watching every frame? Comment below. At 0413, the first Liutyi drones broke the perimeter wire. The lead group of 14 split into 4 subswarms, each with a target package burned into its onboard computer. The first subswarm went straight for the Tu-160 line. 3 of Russia's most prized aircraft, White Swans, the largest combat aircraft ever built, each carrying 12 nuclear-capable Kh-102 cruise missiles, each costing $270 million, sat parked in the open, their gray-white skins faintly luminous in the pre-dawn. The first Liutyi nosed down at 70 degrees and detonated its 7.5-kilogram thermobaric warhead directly onto the wing root of Alexander Novikov, tail number 04. The fuel tanks ignited in a 200-meter fireball that lifted the bomber's nose 3 meters off the apron and dropped it back as a buckled wreck. 2 more Tu-160s detonated within the next 31 seconds. Secondary explosions from their onboard ordnance turning the western dispersal pad into a 400-meter blast crater visible from low Earth orbit. The second subswarm hit the 295 milliseconds line, the propeller-driven turboprop strategic bombers that had served the Soviet Union since 1956 and now formed the backbone of Russia's standoff cruise missile force. 6 of them died in 90 seconds, their fuel tanks rupturing in a chain of orange and black detonations that the operators of Russia's own Resurs-P reconnaissance satellite, passing overhead at the worst possible moment, would later confirm in imagery shown to the Aerospace Force's General Staff. The third subswarm went for the underground KH-101 storage bunker doors, an act of futility. The bunkers were 8 meters of reinforced concrete, but the swarm AI had been told to try anyway, and 4 Liutyi's duly hammered themselves into useless fragments against the steel blast doors. The damage to the bunker was 0. The optics were perfect. Because optics were the entire point. Because while all of this was happening on Red Square, the parade had just begun. Putin was on the reviewing stand. Channel 1 was on the air. The anchor was reading the morning headlines in his solemn baritone. And in a windowless room in Kyiv, an officer of Ukraine's HUR pressed a button that pushed an encrypted file to a server farm in Lithuania, which mirrored to a server farm in Iceland, which fed an autonomous social media distribution network. 6 minutes later, raw drone gun camera footage, 4K, geolocated, time-stamped, showing Russian strategic bombers exploding one after another, was on every social platform on Earth. The official Twitter account of the Ukrainian General Staff posted a single sentence in Ukrainian, English, and Russian, Slava Ukraini, Spraznikum, glory to Ukraine, happy holiday. The parade kept going. Putin kept smiling. He had not yet been told, but at the western edge of the airfield, the nightmare was not over. At 0419, 12 minutes into the strike, The Russian early warning radar at Voronezh DM detected the unmistakable ballistic signature of 3 high-altitude objects rising from a mobile launcher inside Sumy Oblast in northeastern Ukraine. Ballistic profile: apogee 50 kilometers, range bracket 297 kilometers. The Voronezh radar identification computer assigned them a NATO designator before its human operator had finished reading the screen. MGM 140 ATACMS Block 4 American missiles, officially restricted by Washington from striking inside Russia, officially never deployed for this purpose, currently in the air, descending with a flight time to Engels 2 of 270 seconds. In Moscow, in a command bunker beneath the Frunze embankment, the duty officer of the Russian General Staff made a decision that he would later describe as the worst 3 seconds of his life. The ATACMS were inbound. Doctrine required immediate retaliation against the launcher, which doctrine assumed to be Ukrainian. But the ceasefire was in effect. The parade was on television. And if Russia retaliated now, it would be Russia, not Ukraine, that broke the holiday peace on the world stage. He picked up the red telephone. He called the Kremlin. He was put through to Putin's chief of staff. He explained. The chief of staff said 3 words: hold the strike. The ATACMS hit Engels 290 seconds later. 2 of the 3 were intercepted by an S-400 that, by sheer luck, had reset its firmware just in time. The 3rd detonated in the middle of the runway, gouging a 30-meter crater that would take Russian engineers 19 days to repair. No retaliation came. The parade kept going. Putin kept smiling. Except, and this is the part Russian state television will deny, for as long as the Russian Federation exists, the 3rd ATACMS was not American. It was a Ukrainian harem, 2 short-range ballistic missile painted, marked, and configured to mimic an ATACMS perfectly. The launch site was Ukrainian. The decision to make Russia think the United States had crossed the red line was Ukrainian. The gamble that Russia would not retaliate against the parade backdrop and would therefore be unable to retaliate against the real attacker either was Ukrainian. Kyiv had bet its strategic position on a single fact that Vladimir Putin, in this specific moment, with these specific cameras pointed at him, could not afford to be the man who started World War III on Victory Day. The bet won. By 0431, the engagement was over. Ukrainian damage assessment, later confirmed by commercial satellite imagery from Maxar and Planet Labs, released that evening. 3 Tu-160 strategic bombers destroyed. 6 295 millisecond strategic bombers destroyed. 2 MiG-31BM interceptors destroyed on the runway during failed scramble. 12 Pantsir S-2 launchers cyber-killed, and now under emergency software audit, 1 runway cratered, fuel storage compromised, and an S-400 battery that fired 14 missiles at a $14,000 drone now suffering a public relations problem the Kremlin could not fix. Ukrainian losses: 67 of 84 drones expended, 4 special operations operators evacuated successfully into Kazakhstan via routes that will not be revealed, 2 deep cover assets killed in action. The Red Square parade ended on schedule at 1100 Moscow time. The Channel 1 anchors did not mention Engels, too. The foreign dignitaries did not ask. Putin's speech contained no acknowledgement of the strike. State media described an isolated incident of saboteur activity successfully repelled by the heroic defenders of the aerospace forces. By evening, Russian mill bloggers, the only honest voices in the Russian information space, were posting the Maxar imagery side by side with the parade footage, and the comment threads were running 800 messages per minute. The Russian Ministry of Defense did not respond. The Kremlin did not respond. The ceasefire technically held until midnight. Ukraine launched no further strikes. Russia launched no further strikes. The world held its breath, and the world did not get a war on Victory Day. But it got something almost as dangerous. It got proof that Russia's strategic bomber fleet, the air-breathing leg of the nuclear triad that has held Europe at arm's length for 70 years, could be systematically eliminated by $14,000 drones launched from a country whose entire defense budget Russia spends in 3 weeks. Proof that Russian air defense systems can be cyber-poisoned at industrial scale. Proof that NATO red lines about ATACMS strikes inside Russia are now operationally irrelevant, whether the strikes are real or imitated, because the deterrent effect is identical. And proof that the Kremlin's most carefully choreographed political event in the calendar can be reduced to a humiliating split screen on every phone on Earth, the parade marching past Lenin's tomb on the left, 2 160 bombers exploding in the dark on the right. The ceasefire ended at 0001 hours on May 10th. Within 7 minutes, 142 Shahed, 238 drones launched from Russian territory toward Kyiv, Lviv, Odessa, and Kharkiv. The Ukrainian Air Force reported the largest single overnight drone barrage of the war. By dawn, 47 civilians were dead in the rubble of an apartment block in Pechursk district, Kyiv. The vengeance had a timestamp. The vengeance had a name. The vengeance is still ongoing. What you saw at Engels, 2 on Victory Day morning, was not the end of the Russo-Ukrainian war. It was the public reveal of a kind of warfare that did not exist 5 years ago, where a sovereign nuclear state can be operationally embarrassed in real time on its own state television by a swarm of plywood and foam. Drones flown by a graphic designer in a basement in Venezia. The next war will not be won by who has the most warheads. It will be won by who has the cleverest swarm. The next decade will be defined by this morning, and somewhere in a shipping container outside Venezia, the next swarm is already loading its targets. If you believe Ukraine should keep striking Russian strategic assets at this tempo, comment strike below. If you believe this attack will trigger Russian nuclear escalation in 2026, comment escalate. Subscribe, because the war the world thought was frozen just thawed in the most spectacular way in the history of modern conflict. The skies over Saratov are quiet again for now.